The world's first contact with alien life came not as a peaceful exchange of knowledge, but as a ruthless invasion. The sky over the Nevada desert cracked open one blistering summer night, a rip of light that spat out ships like black beetles. Within hours, entire towns vanished, consumed by fire and shadow. The United Earth Command scrambled, and for the first time since the World Wars, humanity faced a truly unified enemy. The aliens were relentless, a species of bone and metal fused into war machines. They had no emissaries, no demands, only the ruthless efficiency of conquerors. On the barren outskirts of the ruins of Elko, a squad of American operatives prepared for what was being called Operation Revenant. Captain Daniel Holt, a decorated Marine with sharp blue eyes and a voice honed by years of command, tightened the straps on his exosuit. Beside him, Lieutenant Mark Rip Ripley, a weapons expert with an irreverent grin, loaded plasma grenades into his belt. The squad's medic, Corporal James Patel, adjusted his augmented goggles, scanning for any signs of movement. And then there was Ethan Vance, a wiry engineer with a penchant for solving the impossible, tinkering with a makeshift drone in the corner of the armored transport. The hum of the transport's engines drowned out the silence of their tension. The plan was simple on paper. Infiltrate the alien command base, steal data on their operations, and if possible, sabotage their warp gate technology. Yet every man in the squad knew this mission bordered on suicidal. The enemy had proven far superior in both firepower and strategy. It wasn't humanity's weapons that had kept them in the fight. It was their unpredictability, their refusal to go down without a fight. 2 minutes to drop, the pilot's voice crackled over the comms. Holt glanced at his team. This isn't the time to get poetic, but I'll say this. Humanity isn't beaten until we say we are. You've trained for this. You've bled for this. Let's show them what makes us different. Rip smirked, tapping his rifle. Let's hope it's not our stubbornness. The transport lurched as it descended, its cloaking shields flickering in the electromagnetic storm surrounding the alien base. Through the viewport, they could see the towering structure ahead, a pulsating hive of alien architecture, all jagged spires and glowing veins of energy. The landscape around it was scorched earth, littered with the remains of downed human fighters and alien drones. The squad dropped into the fray with practiced precision, their exosuits absorbing the impact. Patel immediately activated a bioscan, his goggles lighting up with data. No hostiles within 50 meters, but this place is crawling. We need to move. The team advanced through the rubble, their movements synchronized and silent. Every step closer to the base brought a heavier sense of dread. The alien war machines patrolled in eerie silence, their glowing eyes scanning for any sign of intruders. Holt held up a fist, signaling a halt. He pointed toward a cluster of drones stationed near an energy conduit. Vance crouched beside him, pulling out a small device. Give me 30 seconds, and I'll overload their power grid. Make it 20, Holt whispered, his eyes scanning the horizon. Rip, cover him. Patel, keep an eye on the scanner. Vance's hands moved with practiced precision, connecting wires and programming the device. The hum of the drones grew louder, their lights shifting as if they sensed something was amiss. Rip's finger hovered over the trigger of his rifle, his grin replaced by grim focus. Done, Vance whispered, backing away as the conduit began to spark. A sudden surge of energy exploded through the area, frying the drones in a burst of light. The squad moved quickly, knowing the commotion would draw attention. They reached the base's outer wall, a living metal surface that pulsed like a heartbeat. Holt signaled Vance again, who pulled out a plasma cutter. The device hissed as it carved a hole just large enough for them to slip through. Inside, the air was thick with a strange metallic scent. The walls glowed faintly, casting an otherworldly light on their faces. This place feels alive, Patel muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. It probably is, Rip replied, his tone laced with unease. The squad moved deeper into the base, their footsteps muffled by the strange, organic floor. They reached a chamber that pulsed with energy, its center dominated by a massive console. Alien symbols danced across its surface, incomprehensible yet mesmerizing. Vance's eyes lit up as he approached. "This is it. Give me a minute to pull the data." Holt nodded, his rifle trained on the entrance. "Make it fast. We won't have long before they notice us." As Vance worked, the chamber began to vibrate. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Patel's scanner lit up with red markers. "We've got incoming. Lots of it. Rip, cover the entrance. Patel, get ready to patch anyone up." "Vance, how much longer?" Holt barked, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "Almost there," Vance replied, his fingers flying over the console. The first wave of drones swarmed into the chamber, their movements unnervingly fast. Rip opened fire, his shots precise and deadly. The drones exploded in showers of sparks, but more kept coming. Patel dragged a wounded Rip behind cover, his hands steady as he sealed a gash in the lieutenant's armor. "Got it," Vance shouted, pulling a small data drive from the console. He turned just as a massive alien war machine entered the chamber, its glowing eyes locking onto the squad. "Run," Holt ordered, firing a volley of shots to cover their retreat. The squad bolted back through the base, the war machine in relentless pursuit. They barely made it through the hole in the wall before the structure behind them erupted in explosions. The power grid Vance had tampered with earlier had overloaded, setting off a chain reaction. Outside, the squad sprinted toward the extraction point, the alien war machine still on their heels. The transport appeared on the horizon, its engines roaring as it descended. The squad leaped aboard, the war machine's energy blast narrowly missing them as the transport took off. Breathing heavily, Holt looked at the data drive in Vance's hand. "Please tell me that was worth it." Vance grinned, holding up the drive. "We've got their warp gate schematics. This could turn the tide." Holt nodded, his expression grim but determined. "Good. Let's make sure it does." As the transport disappeared into the stormy sky, the alien war machine stood motionless, its glowing eyes fixed on the horizon. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, humanity had a chance to strike back. The USS Resolute crept through the black void of space, a wounded but determined ship navigating the perilous fringes of Itrax-controlled territory. Its hull was patched with salvage materials, the once pristine surface now a patchwork of makeshift repairs. Inside, the crew was worn thin, supplies dwindling, spirits low. The constant hum of the engines and the distant clatter of engineers working in the lower decks offered little comfort. The Itrax, an alien hive mind race bent on conquest, had grown stronger with every passing day. Yet, the humans aboard the Resolute were not ready to give in. Dr. Carter, an astute scientist with a knack for unconventional solutions, leaned over a console in the lab, fingers flying across the touchpad as she analyzed a trove of Itrax technology. Specialist Haynes, her closest collaborator, hovered nearby, staring at the schematics displayed on the screen. The alien tech, scavenged from a previous raid, had seemed impenetrable at first. But now, with Carter's sharp mind and Haynes' technical prowess, they had made a breakthrough. "They're communicating through a hive mind network," Carter muttered, her voice tinged with awe. "But it's not as impenetrable as we thought." Haynes raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me we can actually disrupt it?" Carter nodded. "I believe so. These devices," she gestured to the schematics, "can emit a signal that jams their communication. It won't eliminate the hive mind, but it'll sever their connection. Individual units will be less coordinated." Haynes was already pulling up the data on his own screen, eyes scanning the readout. "It's risky, but it could work. If we're going to fight these things, we need an edge. This might be it." Meanwhile, Captain Grayson was overseeing a strategy meeting in the command center, his face as hard as granite. The Resolute was more than just a ship now. It had become their mobile command center, a place of constant planning and survival. He stared at the hollow map before him, showing the positions of Itrak's outposts scattered across the sector. With the new disruption tech, they had the potential to strike, but how? "We hit them fast, hit them hard," Grayson said, his voice calm but steely. "We can use the disruption emitters to cripple their communications before they even know we're there. Strike first, and we'll weaken their defenses." Lieutenant Collins, always quick with a suggestion, chimed in. "We can exploit their formations during dogfights. The Itraks rely too heavily on tight-knit squads. If we can break their lines, they'll scatter." Grayson nodded, impressed. "Good idea. We'll need to keep the pressure on them. Force them into situations where their rigid tactics become their downfall." Collins smiled, a rare flash of pride crossing his face. "We'll take every advantage we can get." Staff Sergeant Reed was already preparing his Marines for their next mission. This one would take them behind enemy lines. With the disruption emitters in hand, they would be able to infiltrate and sabotage critical Itrax installations. His unit, a band of hardened soldiers, had been training relentlessly for this moment. The mission was dangerous, the risks high, but Reed knew they could pull it off. He had faith in his men and in himself. "Stay sharp, Marines," Reed barked during a pre-mission briefing. "We're going in, and we're going in quiet. No mistakes. We get in, sabotage the Itrax facilities, and get out. No glory, just survival." The tension in the air was palpable as the Marines suited up, checking their gear and ensuring their weapons were ready. They had all seen the horrors of the Itrax war firsthand. Burned ships, shattered families, entire planets lost. But they were still fighting, still pushing forward. And that was something the Itrax hadn't expected. Back on the Resolute, the crew began the final preparations for the upcoming operations. Specialist Haynes was working with the engineering team to integrate the disruption emitters into the ship's arsenal. The devices, while powerful, were delicate and needed to be carefully calibrated. The last thing they needed was a malfunction in the middle of a raid. As the team worked, Grayson's mind raced. This was a turning point, a chance to finally shift the momentum of the war in humanity's favor. But it came with its own set of challenges. The Itrax were relentless, and their hive mind was a formidable weapon. Even if they could disable communication, it wasn't enough to defeat them outright. The humans would need to adapt constantly, find new tactics, and innovate at every turn. As the Resolute entered the Itrax system, Grayson couldn't help but feel the weight of their situation. The ship was their last hope. The crew, his family, was all that stood between humanity and total annihilation. Every success would bring them closer to victory, but each failure could mean the end. The first strike came swiftly. Using the disruption emitters, the Resolute launched a surprise attack on a small Itrax outpost. The Itrax were caught off guard, their hive minds severed for just long enough to make them vulnerable. Grayson's tactics were precise, hitting the outpost with overwhelming force and retreating before the Itrax could regroup. "We did it," Collins said with a grin, watching the outpost crumble on the monitor. "One down." Grayson allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but he knew it wouldn't be long before the Itrax adapted. The war was far from over. Staff Sergeant Reed's mission, meanwhile, had gone according to plan. His Marines had infiltrated Itrax territory, using the chaos created by the disruption emitters to wreak havoc behind enemy lines. They'd taken out vital infrastructure, destroyed supply caches, and left the Itrax scrambling. But the toll was heavy. Lives were lost, and the cost of their success weighed heavily on Reed's mind. As the Resolute pulled back to regroup, the crew gathered in the war room, weary but triumphant. They had struck a blow against the Itrax, but the road ahead would be long and fraught with danger. For every victory, there would be new challenges, new sacrifices. But for now, they had a moment of triumph, and the knowledge that they could adapt, innovate, and survive. The Resolute sliced through the darkness of space. Its crew braced for the most dangerous mission of their lives. Their target was the heart of the Itrax invasion fleet, the Command Nexus. This massive ship, a mobile hub of intelligence and coordination, was the key to the Itrax's relentless advance. If they could disable it, the entire invasion might collapse, sending the Itrax into disarray. But the plan was fraught with peril, and Grayson knew that it could cost them everything. As the ship moved closer to the Nexus, the tension on the Resolute was palpable. Dr. Carter had worked tirelessly to perfect the disruption technology, enhancing it to a level that could potentially cripple the Nexus' ability to command the Itrax forces. But as they neared the heart of the enemy fleet, something strange happened. The Itrax, usually single-minded and relentless, seemed to hesitate. "This doesn't make sense," Carter said, staring at the readings on her screen. They're not reacting like they normally do. There's something more to their strategy." Haynes looked over her shoulder, squinting at the data. "What do you mean? Are they more coordinated than usual?" "No," Carter replied, shaking her head slowly. "It's like they're adapting, almost like they're anticipating our moves." "But why?" Grayson stood at the command console, watching the exchange. He had never felt more uncertain about their mission. The Itrax were a ruthless enemy, relentless and efficient in their pursuit of conquest. But Carter's discovery nagged at him. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The Itrax were not a species driven by malice or bloodlust. They were simply fighting for survival. "They've been displaced," Grayson murmured. "Their homeworlds, their entire way of life, destroyed. They're not invaders by nature. They're refugees." Carter glanced up, her eyes wide with shock. "Refugees? But that means we're killing people who have no other choice," Grayson finished for her, his voice heavy with the weight of the realization. The words felt like a stone in his gut. They had been fighting the Itrax as if they were an evil force. But what if that wasn't the case? What if humanity had become the true aggressor in this war? But there was no time for deep reflection. The mission was in motion, and the crew had a job to do. The Nexus was within reach, and every second spent questioning their purpose could cost them their lives. The choice now was between saving humanity at the cost of another species, or finding a way to stop the war without further bloodshed. Grayson turned to his crew, making a decision. "We'll proceed with the mission, but I need everyone to keep their heads. We're not just going in to destroy them. We're going to end this conflict one way or another." Dr. Carter was already working, using the disruption emitters to infiltrate the Nexus communications. She had devised a plan to disable the Nexus without destroying it, a risky maneuver that involved using their own technology to hack into the Nexus systems and turn its weapons off. It was a 1 in a million chance of success, and Carter knew the risks. If she failed, the entire fleet would be lost. "I'll need to be inside to initiate the shutdown," Carter said, looking at Grayson. "Once I'm in, I'll have to stay connected to their system long enough to complete the process. If they catch me..." Grayson nodded, his face grim. "We'll keep them off your back. Do whatever it takes, Carter." Meanwhile, Staff Sergeant Reed's guerrilla unit was preparing for their mission to infiltrate the Nexus. They would be operating on the inside, taking the fight directly to the Itrax warriors. Reed had trained his Marines for this very moment, and now they were ready. They moved silently through the shadows, each step calculated, each breath controlled. Reed knew that hand-to-hand combat was their only option. They couldn't afford to be detected. "Keep your heads down, Marines," Reed whispered over the comms. "Once we're in, we fight. Hard." Lieutenant Collins was leading a diversionary attack from the Resolute, piloting their fighter craft with deadly precision. His mission was to draw the Itrax forces away from the Nexus, providing cover for Reed's team and giving Carter the time she needed to access the Nexus systems. Collins was a natural in the cockpit, his skills honed in countless skirmishes. He had always been the first to take the offensive, to turn the tide with his quick thinking and fearless execution. "Got their attention," Collins reported, a grin audible in his voice. "They're coming after me. Let's see if they can keep up." The battle began in earnest as Reed's Marines fought their way through the Nexus. The Itrax warriors were formidable opponents, brutal and relentless in their attacks. The sound of clashing metal and grunts of exertion filled the air as Reed's team pressed forward, moving through the darkened corridors of the enemy vessel. The battle raged as Grayson watched from the Resolute. He kept one eye on the situation outside, where Collins continued to outmaneuver the Itrax forces, and another on Carter, who was deep within the heart of the Nexus. The tension in the air was almost suffocating. Time was running out. "Carter, how's it going?" Grayson asked, his voice strained. "I'm in," she replied, her voice calm but tinged with exhaustion. "It's working. I just need another minute." But that minute felt like an eternity. Reed's team was engaged in fierce combat, barely holding their ground as Itrax reinforcements poured in. Each moment, they risked everything to buy Carter the time she needed. Grayson felt the weight of their sacrifice, their lives hanging in the balance as they fought for a chance to end the war. Finally, Carter's voice came through, shaky but victorious. "I've done it. The Nexus is disabled." The impact was immediate. The Itrax forces, now leaderless, began to falter. Their coordinated attacks crumbled as they lost their central command. It was chaos as the Nexus, once the heart of the invasion, shut down completely. With their communications severed and their cohesion lost, the Itrax were forced to retreat. Grayson stood, breathing heavily, his mind racing. The battle was over, but the war wasn't. The crew had succeeded, but at a terrible cost. As they returned to Earth, victorious but broken, Grayson couldn't shake the nagging thought that lingered in his mind. Humanity had won, but at what price? The enemy had been defeated, but the question remained. Had they become the very monster they had been fighting against?